Zuri stood in front of the tall mirror in her bedroom, smoothing down the hem of her bright yellow dress, her favorite color, one that always seemed to make her feel bold and alive. Today was her birthday, and the house in Accra she had worked so hard to buy for herself buzzed with activity. The scent of jollof rice and fried plantains drifted from the kitchen where her mother and aunts fussed over last-minute preparations. She could hear the laughter of younger cousins playing outside, their voices carrying over the warm late-morning air. Her heart swelled with a mix of excitement and unease. The celebration should have been simple, joyful, but she knew it wouldn't be. Her cousin Ebony, who had never held a steady job but somehow always managed to look effortlessly polished, had been dropping hints all week about Zuri's lucky position in life. Every compliment seemed edged with envy, every smile a little too tight. Zuri's independence, the house she had purchased with her own earnings, and the small inheritance she had wisely managed had become silent points of contention in the family. As she descended the staircase, the familiar chatter of relatives swirled around. Some offered warm hugs. Others lingered just long enough to remark on the size of her living room or the view from her balcony. Zuri's lips curved into a polite smile, but inside, she tightened her jaw. She could feel the unspoken expectations hanging in the air, the hope that she would quietly hand over her home to family, as though her years of hard work were simply theirs to claim. Today, she decided, she would enjoy her celebration on her terms, come what may. The party was in full swing by the time Zuri walked into the living room. The space transformed into a riot of color and sound. Bright balloons hung from the ceiling, shimmering streamers twisted along the walls, and a banner proudly announced, "Happy Birthday, Zuri." The soft hum of a high-life playlist mixed with bursts of laughter as friends and family mingled, clinking glasses filled with Zobo and palm wine. Children ran between tables, chasing each other with sticky fingers and paper hats, their excitement contagious. Guests drifted toward the centerpiece of the room, the cake, a towering creation of chocolate and cream with Zuri piped in golden icing. Everyone whispered about how beautiful it looked, eager for the moment when Zuri would cut the first slice. Cameras clicked as people jostled to capture the perfect photo, smiles lighting up their faces. For a brief moment, the room seemed like nothing could go wrong. But beneath the music and laughter, Zuri felt the sharp edges of her family's eyes. Her cousin Ebony lingered nearby, tilting her head with that polite but cautious smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Such a big celebration for just a house owner," Ebony said, loud enough for Zuri to hear, the words wrapped in sweetness but laced with mockery. Zuri's uncle made a joke about how some people had more luck than sense, a thinly veiled comment about her independence and wealth. Her cheeks flamed, but she stayed composed, sipping her drink as if nothing could touch her. Despite the underlying tension, the other guests remained oblivious, chatting and laughing as if everything were normal. Children squealed as they tried to sneak a taste of the cake's frosting, and friends complimented Zuri on how radiant she looked, making her chest swell with pride. She knew the real test would come later, but for now, she let herself enjoy the sounds of the party. The music, the chatter, the clinking glasses, and the brief illusion that this day could be hers completely, if only for a little while. As the cake was finally brought to the center of the room, the chatter seemed to grow louder, but Zuri felt a tightening in her chest. Her uncle cleared his throat, leaning closer with that familiar predatory smile. "Zuri, you've done so well for yourself," he said, voice sweet but heavy. "But surely it wouldn't hurt to help out Ebony. She's struggling, you know. That house of yours, maybe it's time to think of family first." Zuri's fork paused midair. She turned slowly, her eyes calm but firm. "Uncle, I appreciate your concern," she replied, keeping her tone gentle but unshakable. "But the house is mine. I bought it with my own money, and it's not something I can just give away. I hope you understand." The room fell quiet, though the music continued softly in the background. Ebony's lips pressed into a thin line, her hands trembling slightly as she tried to hide her frustration. "Just a little help," Ebony murmured, leaning toward Zuri, voice almost pleading. "You don't need it all for yourself." Zuri shook her head, keeping her smile polite. "I've worked hard for this, Ebony. I can't just hand it over. I need to think about what's right for me, too." A few relatives exchanged shocked glances, whispers floating just beneath the surface. One aunt muttered under her breath, "She's gone too far this time." Another cousin laughed nervously, trying to cover up the tension, while a friend from outside the family looked around, confused by the sudden coldness that had replaced the earlier. Zuri felt the weight of every pair of eyes in the room, but she refused to falter. Each polite refusal seemed to deepen the family's disbelief. They had expected her to comply without question, to nod and smile while giving away the home she had built. Instead, she had drawn a line, and the shift in power was subtle but unmistakable. Conversations paused, hands fidgeted, and Zuri realized that her calmness alone was starting to turn the tide, even if the family didn't yet know it. The cake sat untouched in the middle of the table, a silent witness to the growing tension. For the first time that day, Zuri felt the sharp clarity of what independence truly meant. Not just the money or the house, but the courage to say no when everyone expected her to say yes. The room had barely begun to settle after the confrontation when Ebony's eyes flared with sudden fury. Without warning, she lunged forward, grabbing a handful of frosting from the towering birthday cake. Before anyone could react, she pressed it squarely into Zuri's face. Chocolate and cream slid down Zuri's cheeks, dripping onto her dress and the polished floor. Gasps erupted around the room. Some guests covered their mouths in shock, while a few awkwardly laughed, unsure whether to find it funny or horrified. Time seemed to freeze for Zuri for a brief moment. Her cheeks burned, not just from the frosting, but from the humiliation of having the party she had worked to enjoy hijacked in front of everyone. The laughter, the whispers, the pointed glances from relatives, it all collided into a sharp sting. For a second, she felt the urge to retaliate, to shove Ebony back or yell, but she caught herself. Inside, though, her mind was clear. This is exactly what I expected from her. Anger and jealousy are always louder than reason, but they don't define me. She took a slow breath, letting the sticky mess settle on her face while scanning the room. Some guests looked horrified, others uncomfortable, but a few stared, silently admiring her restraint. Ebony's chest heaved, her eyes wild, but Zuri refused to let her cousin's temper dictate her reaction. She wiped her face with a napkin, careful and deliberate, as though each movement was a quiet assertion of control. They think this cake smear changes anything? It doesn't. It never could. I'm still me, still in charge of my own life. The contrast between her calm and Ebony's flailing anger drew subtle murmurs from the crowd. Guests started to shift in their seats, noticing the quiet dignity in Zuri's posture, the unwavering calm in her eyes, and the complete lack of panic or anger. The cake, once a symbol of celebration, now lay half-ruined, smeared across the table and floor. But Zuri refused to see it as a defeat. In that moment, she realized that composure could be far more powerful than retaliation, and that strength didn't have to be loud or messy to be seen. Around her, the room buzzed with tension, but she held herself like a quiet storm, ready for whatever came next. Zuri stood still for a moment, letting the sticky frosting slide down her face, her dress spotted with chocolate and cream. The room had gone quiet, the earlier laughter now replaced with a tense mix of shocked gasps and murmurs. Ebony's chest heaved with frustration, expecting screams or tears, but Zuri didn't give her the satisfaction. Instead, she reached for a napkin and gently wiped her face, careful not to flinch or show anger. Each slow, deliberate movement sent a quiet message. She was in control. Her relatives shifted uncomfortably, realizing that their plan to provoke her had failed. The older aunts whispered behind hands, glancing nervously at each other, while uncles cleared their throats, unsure how to respond. Even Ebony faltered for a moment, her bravado faltering as she watched Zuri remain composed. Zuri's calmness, simple as it seemed, carried a quiet weight that her family had never accounted for. They were used to seeing her polite, cooperative, always yielding to their pressure, but not this time. The guests began to notice the difference too. Friends from outside the family exchanged impressed glances, their eyes reflecting admiration. Here was a young woman, faced with humiliation, and yet she carried herself with dignity. The contrast between Zuri's poised silence and her relative's immature, angry behavior was impossible to ignore. Children paused mid-play, sensing the shift in energy, and even the servants paused in the background, unsure whether to step in or continue their work. Zuri took a deep breath, feeling the sticky residue on her skin, but refusing to let it matter. Inside, she reviewed every lesson she had learned about patience, self-respect, and strategy. They want a reaction. They want me shaken. I won't give it to them. Each whisper and sideways glance from her family only strengthened her resolve. By simply standing her ground and staying calm, she had begun to reclaim the power they had tried to wrest from her. The cake sat ruined on the table, a symbol of Ebony's anger and failed intimidation. But Zuri didn't need the cake to prove herself. Her composure, her quiet strength, and her unwavering confidence had spoken louder than any outburst ever could. And in that moment, she knew the tide had begun to turn in her favor, one calm breath at a time. The moment of calm didn't last long. Almost immediately, the whispers started again, low but sharp, weaving through the room like a persistent hum. Zuri's uncle cleared his throat and leaned closer, voice oily with expectation. Zuri, you've always been stubborn, but surely family comes first. That house, Ebony could really use it. Don't be so selfish. His eyes flicked toward Ebony, silently daring her to add her weight to the argument. Zuri met his gaze steadily. I've said no, she replied evenly, her tone calm, refusing to rise to their bait. I respect all of you, but the house is mine. I worked for it. I won't give it away. Amini's face twisted in frustration, and she began recounting old grievances, highlighting moments where Zuri had supposedly turned her back on family. Remember when you didn't lend me money for my school fees? Or when you refused to help with the business? Abini's voice trembled with false indignation, but Zuri could almost laugh at the memory. She remembered those times clearly, not as failures, but as lessons in self-protection. Each demand, each subtle manipulation from her family over the years had taught her patience, taught her how to hold firm. Her mind drifted briefly to other moments. Her father's long-winded lectures about generosity, the way her aunts had tried to guilt her into giving up her savings, the casual comments about how she owed her family. She had survived all of it with grace, navigating their expectations without losing herself. Those experiences were her armor now. As the room grew tense, Zuri allowed a small, quiet smile to curve her lips. They think they know me. They think I'll bend under pressure. But they don't. Every comment, every judgmental glance only reinforced her resolve. She had a plan, one her family could not see yet, a quiet strategy to protect what was hers and show them that respect could not be demanded. It had to be earned. Around her, her relatives continued to circle, poking at her with questions and veiled criticisms. But Zuri's calm presence made their words seem smaller, less threatening. She stood in the center of the room like the eye of a storm, serene yet unyielding, every ounce of composure a reminder that she would not be swayed by anger, envy, or shame. The tension built, thick and heavy, but Zuri met it all with quiet confidence, letting the room realize slowly she was not to be underestimated. Just as Abini opened her mouth to launch another complaint, the front door opened with a sharp knock. Everyone turned toward the sound, and in walked a tall, serious-looking man in a crisp suit, holding a thick folder under his arm. "Good afternoon," he said clearly, his voice cutting through the murmurs. "I am here on behalf of Zuri. I have documents regarding the house in question." The room froze. Zuri's relatives, who had been circling her like predators, exchanged quick glances. Their confident expressions faltered, shifting from smug amusement to a flicker of panic. Abini's jaw dropped, and her hands dropped to her sides as she stared at the lawyer, unsure whether to speak or run. Zuri felt a small rush of satisfaction, though she remained composed. She gestured toward the man. "Everyone, this is Mr. Osei. He will explain the legal situation regarding the house." The lawyer stepped forward, placing the folder on the table, and began methodically spreading out papers. "These documents confirm that Zuri is the sole legal owner of the property," he announced, his tone formal but firm. "Any attempt to claim ownership or force a transfer would be unlawful and result in immediate legal action." A low murmur ran through the room. Guests, who had been nervously observing the tension between Zuri and her family, exchanged wide-eyed looks of disbelief. Some whispered to each other, shaking their heads, while others leaned forward, trying to get a glimpse of the papers. It was as if the entire balance of the party had shifted in a single moment. Zuri's family, meanwhile, had gone completely silent. Her uncle's lips pressed into a thin line, his previous arrogance evaporated. Aunts clutched their hands together, and cousins looked at each other with wide, stunned eyes. Even Abini seemed to shrink under the weight of the revelation, her earlier anger replaced with a mixture of fear and embarrassment. Zuri remained standing, calm and poised, watching as the power dynamics flipped in front of everyone. The guests, who had only moments ago seen a family squabble, now witnessed a quiet but undeniable shift. It was clear who held the upper hand. Zuri didn't need to raise her voice or demand respect. The papers did it for her. In that instant, she felt a surge of quiet triumph, knowing that her careful planning and steadfast resolve had turned the situation entirely in her favor. The lawyer cleared his throat and began reading aloud, his voice steady and deliberate. "According to the registered documents, Zuri is the sole legal owner of the property located at 12 Kruma Avenue, Accra. Any attempt to claim ownership, transfer, or occupy the house without her consent is a violation of the law and will result in immediate legal action." A ripple of shock ran through the room. Zuri's relatives froze mid-gesture, as if the words themselves had struck them physically. Abini's face turned pale, her hands dropping to her sides. The smug confidence that had carried her through the afternoon vanished completely, replaced by wide-eyed disbelief. Aunts and uncles exchanged hurried glances, muttering under their breaths, unable to hide the growing panic. The festive atmosphere, once full of laughter, chatter, and the scent of food, seemed to collapse instantly. The bright decorations and cheerful music now felt out of place, almost mocking, as if the party itself recognized the shift in power. Even the children, previously darting around the room, paused, sensing the tension, while guests whispered nervously among themselves. Zuri watched quietly, letting the moment sink in. She remained composed, standing tall despite the chocolate stains still on her dress. Inside, a small smile tugged at her lips. They thought they could intimidate me, shame me, push me around. But here I am, and they have nothing. Her calm presence only amplified the embarrassment of her family, highlighting the stark contrast between her poise and their flustered, guilty faces. Ebony's voice, when it finally emerged, was a weak, almost defeated whisper. I didn't know, she trailed off, looking around as though searching for a lifeline. The rest of the family mirrored her. Their earlier certainty evaporated into awkward silence. Even those who had tried to maintain a neutral stance now seemed caught in the uncomfortable spotlight of their failed manipulation. Guests, sensing the complete reversal of authority, started murmuring appreciatively about Zuri's composure. They admired how she had handled humiliation, pressure, and now legal power, all without raising her voice. In that moment, it was clear to everyone in the room. The house belonged to Zuri, and her independence was unshakable. The family's miscalculation had cost them their confidence, and the truth of Zuri's ownership stood undeniable, like a quiet but immovable force at the center of the room. Zuri took a slow, steady breath and faced her family, the room quiet except for the soft hum of the music in the background. I want everyone to understand something, she began, her voice calm but carrying an unmistakable firmness. This house and everything I've worked for is mine. I respect all of you, but respect must go both ways. I will not give away what I earned, and I will not allow anyone to pressure me into decisions that compromise my independence. Her relatives shifted uncomfortably. Ebony's eyes darted down to the floor, cheeks flushed with embarrassment. Uncles and aunts muttered apologies under their breath, but Zuri didn't waver. She continued, letting her words sink in. Family is important, yes. But family should not demand what doesn't belong to them or try to shame someone for making choices for themselves. I have worked hard, and I will continue to work hard, not to prove anything to you, but to live the life I want, honestly, fairly, and independently. Guests exchanged glances, their admiration visible in soft smiles and quiet nods. They had watched the entire afternoon unfold, the subtle mockery, the cake smearing, the tension, and now, Zuri's composure and courage shone even brighter. Some whispered softly to each other, noting how she had remained dignified, refusing to stoop to anger or retaliation. Ebony stepped forward tentatively. I'm sorry, Zuri, she said, her voice shaky. Other relatives murmured similar words, their apologies awkward and belated. But Zuri shook her head gently. Apologies are appreciated, she said, her tone steady. But I hope you also understand that respect and boundaries are more important than words. I cannot undo the past, but I can insist that my independence and decisions are respected from now on. Her statement hung in the air, carrying a quiet power that no one could argue with. The tension in the room shifted. What had been an uncomfortable mix of envy, anger, and expectation now settled into a reluctant acknowledgement. Zuri had drawn a line, and everyone understood it clearly. Her dignity was not negotiable, her independence was absolute, and her composure was unshakable. For the first time that afternoon, Zuri felt the weight of victory, not in shouting or proving anyone wrong, but in standing firm, calmly, and confidently, while her family's misjudgments and attempts to manipulate her fell away. She had won more than a house or a party. She had won respect, self-assurance, and the undeniable truth that she was in control of her life. After the tension finally eased, Zuri looked around the room and saw her friends gathering near the table, smiling warmly and offering congratulations. Their presence felt like a shield against the earlier storm, a reminder that she had people in her life who truly valued her for who she was, not just what she owned. Laughter returned, softer and more genuine this time, as conversations shifted from family drama to shared memories, jokes, and music that made everyone sway along with the beat. The ruined cake, once a symbol of humiliation, was now carefully portioned and served properly to guests. Each slice handed out seemed to carry a quiet triumph, a small celebration of resilience and dignity. Children gleefully accepted their pieces, and friends raised glasses, toasting not just to Zuri's birthday, but to her strength, her calm under pressure, and her ability to navigate a storm without losing herself. Zuri leaned against the table for a moment, sipping her drink and letting the evening settle around her. She thought about the earlier chaos, the whispered demands, the anger, the jealousy, and smiled quietly to herself. She had faced it all without losing control, without letting anyone undermine her independence. Today had reminded her that standing firm wasn't just about money or property. It was about respect, self-worth, and the courage to draw boundaries even when it's uncomfortable. As music played and friends laughed, Zuri felt a deep sense of closure. The house was hers, the party was hers, and her dignity was hers. The leftover cake, served properly and shared joyfully, felt like a small but perfect symbol of victory. She had not only celebrated a birthday, but had also claimed a quiet, powerful win over envy, pressure, and family expectation. For Zuri, this day was more than a celebration. It was a reminder that independence and self-respect were the truest gifts she could give herself.